Okay, so to make sure that we start fairly timely, we'll kick off with this today. Welcome to everyone that is joining this webinar by SAI platform on our Regenerating Together framework, all about version 1.1. Let's get into it. So, as you know, well, as many of you will know, we start all of our SAI platform meetings with our antitrust caution statement. So this really, in effect, for those of you that have perhaps not attended one of our sessions before, is just to ensure that none of our events or meetings result in any discussion, activity, or conduct that could in any way infringe on any applicable competition law. So I'll give you just a moment to review this. In the event that anything comes remotely close to you being slightly worried about this, you can just raise your hand, let us know when we pause the conversation. Okay, so a little bit of housekeeping for today. Can you please, those of you that aren't speaking, please mute your line. We will also share the slides and the recording from today with all of you that have registered. And we actively encourage you to post questions in the chat throughout this session. There'll also be Q&A at the end as well. So in terms of what we have in store today, we'll start with a welcome and some context setting. We'll then go into the details by the team around the framework itself, the updates. And then we are really excited to have a few of our members talking about how they are testing and adopting, kind of embracing the framework themselves. I'll finish with a little bit looking ahead at what else is to come, and there will be time for Q&A as well. So that's kind of what we've got for the next hour for you. And in terms of speakers, so you will not be hearing from me all the time, which is probably good to hear. And we've got quite a range. We've got Dominic, Julia, and myself, all from SAI Platform and the Region Ag team. And then we'll also be hearing from Yves Leclerc at McCain, who's the Director of Agronomy, Sarah Lockwood at Danone, who's Director for Region Ag, and Axel Beroy LDC, who is their Global Head of Region Ag as well. So quite a lot in store today, but I'll be, I guess, keeping the flow, making sure that you know whereabouts we are in the webinar so that you don't get lost in among it all. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over for just a couple of minutes to Yves, who is the Regenerating Together Steerco Chair, I believe. So Yves, can you just start us off with a little bit about, okay, this Regenerating Together program and the framework? Can you just tell us what does it mean to you, and I guess why have you chosen to take such an active role in helping to develop it?
Yeah, thanks, Robin. Well, what it means to me, I've got a couple of hats. First of all, I'd like to say that from a SteerCo point of view, what it means is that we have accomplished, I think, a lot of what we were setting ourselves to. So I think for us, it's a great milestone that we have actually released our version 1.1. From a personal point of view and from a company point of view, I think that what it really means to me is that we were able to get to something that is going to be close to a global standard, I think, in terms of Region Ag, that is going to be workable with growers. And that for me is very important because really all of the steps that we need to take moving forward would involve us working with growers to be able to achieve what we're looking at. I think what is really great with the framework, it allows us to have a common definition of what Region Ag is, of the outcome. But more importantly as well, I think it allows us to have a common language to be able to engage with the growers, which is very, very critical, but also our customers and to, I would say, and the greater public in general. The program really allows us as well, in my mind, to work collectively. I think it's clear that for everyone that has been working on Region Ag, that this is not something that we can do alone as a company. We need to work collectively. So I think the framework really allows us to have that platform of collaboration, which I think is very important, because in the end, what's going to count for us, for our companies, our supply chain, is that we need to have impact. Impact on what? Impact on climate, impact on biodiversity, soil health, water, and ultimately as well, we need to be able to guarantee grower livelihood. And if we take example of what's going on at COP28 and COP16, we know that gathering broad consensus is difficult. I think we have achieved that as part of the Regenerating Together program here at a much smaller scale, but we do, I think, have a strong plan to be able to advance the common cause that we're all working together, which is basically making our supply chain more sustainable over time. But I think more importantly as well is to address the challenge that climate change is going to be at the farm level, and also be able to provide growers a tool to also move in a direction which will benefit them and benefit us collectively. So I think that's what it means for me in a nutshell, and I'll pass it on for Dominique for continuation of our presentation. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, no,
Awesome.
thank you so much, Yves, for these introductory words. Let me continue with giving you an overview of the framework. And let me first start with, why we developed that. Why has SAI platform and its members, why have we been working on the topic of regenerative agriculture? Why have we developed this framework after all? And I think for that, I have to take you back a bit in history around the trend around the regenerative agriculture. So it really gained traction from something like 2015 onwards. It has become more and more common language in sustainable sourcing. However, one of the challenges is that there was no agreed or shared definition of what it is, but also of what it is not. So unlike organic farming, for instance, it doesn't have a strict or any definition of what it entails. And that leads to some challenges. The most prominent one is that that leaves the way for many different interpretations, many different frameworks by individual companies in the food and beverage value chain, in our industry, but also in other sectors or along the value chain. And the result of that is what you see of that lack of an aligned definition is a confusion at farm level. Farmers don't know what to do and what to follow. They might be locked in a specific supply chain because they follow the rules of one company that sources from them, but cannot then deliver to another. But it also makes it quite difficult to evaluate the benefits, basically define what success looks like from regenerative agriculture or from a transition of a farm to regenerative agriculture, and how to claim success and how to communicate success. So it's also difficult for the industry. And I think as a result of that is what we have seen to date is there is a lot of debate and discussion around regenerative agriculture. What we need to see more is a large-scale adoption of regenerative agriculture across many farming systems to really drive the change and the impact we aspire to. And I think that's something we hear a lot from our membership is basically, we really need to get our act together, or we really need to work quickly now to contribute or to achieve our commitments for 2030 or 2050. So, really driving that agenda. So overcoming that limitation of on-ground action is key. Maybe with that, we can go to the next slide. And I think that's also what many of our, or a subgroup of our members, 33 founding members, whose logos you see here on the left-hand side of this slide, came together to tackle this challenge. So in 2021, they came together and they mandated and resourced SAI platform to initiate the Regenerating Together program. And this was a program to basically help the industry to create a shared definition of what regenerative agriculture is. So hinting at the aspects that Yves raised earlier, and create a shared industry-wide definition of regenerative agriculture. Not just that, also to develop a list of what outcomes we can expect or we should expect from transitioning to regenerative agriculture. So what does success look like? And also a set of guidance documents that help implement that framework in specific supply chains, and to make verified claims and communicate claims along the value chain. So that is the core mandate of the program and also the framework that we present to you today. With that, again, we can go to the next slide. Here you see an overview or a glimpse of what the framework looks like, and we have published that on October 31st. And we can share that. We will share that with you, of course, after this call. But here we are to discuss further details of that. So to develop that framework, these founding members also agreed on key design principles for the framework very early in the process. So what are the principles we want to hold high, we want to implement with the framework, we want to have the framework consider. And I think three key design principles here come to mind. The first one is that it should be outcome-based. So it should be explicit about what we expect from a transition to regenerative agriculture, but not necessarily imposed to a farm or to a group of farmers on how they run this transition. So the framework doesn't want to imply certain practices on a farm, but wants to specify what does success look like, what outcomes we prioritize, and we want to prove a farming system's performance against. The second design principle is around specificity to context. As we all know, farming is very specific on where you grow something, how you grow something, what you grow, or what you produce. And we all need, of course, globally applicable outcomes to report against as the industry, but we need to make them actionable at the context of a farming system. So prioritizing outcomes to the context-specific production and environmental risks of that system are key, and this is a key aspect of the framework. And then the third design principle is around inclusivity. So again, underlining that farming is very context-specific. Different farming systems have different abilities, different resource bases that allow for different levels of implementation of regenerative agriculture. And we have the deep intention that we want the framework to be relevant to all of them, independently on whether they produce dairy in Europe or whether they grow coffee in Ethiopia. So that this is a framework that is really globally applicable and inclusive to all relevant terrestrial farming systems. I think with that, we can move to the next slide again. As a next step, and what I want to underline is what we present here is the result of multiple rounds of consultation and multiple rounds of consultation with different stakeholders we've consulted, and over a couple of years actually. So firstly, we very much consulted with the SAI platform membership, and I would like to thank them, the membership and the members, for their contributions. These are the working groups. SAI platform has member working groups for crops, dairy, and beef. So we continuously engaged with them to refine the outcomes we expect from the framework, but also, as you will see later, the performance levels that we have established to qualify for regenerative agriculture for farms or farming groups. We also heavily consulted with our steering committee, which is a subset of members that guide us on a monthly basis on key decisions we have to take to drive our program and framework forward. So I would like to thank all of them for their contribution. In addition to that, this year we established an external stakeholder advisory board. These are particularly two stakeholder groups. It's farmers and academics. And this is really to respond to what we have observed in the process is the industry talking a lot to each other, but we actually need to broaden our stakeholder basis along the value chain and also with science, to make sure that we don't only speak to ourselves. So avoiding an industry tunnel view, creating a solution that is actionable and meaningful at farm level. So as Yves mentioned, a language, something that is workable with farmers, a language to engage with farmers, very importantly. And also finally, we really want to be science-based, evidence-based with that, with our framework. So that has been a key principle. And again, I would like to thank the advisory board for their very valuable contributions in the development of the framework. Finally, on the consultation, and again, underlining that what we present today should be workable, is just we want to underline that what we present here has also undergone several rounds of testing across diverse farming systems, as you can see here, and several geographies, just to make sure that what we have developed, it works, is workable at farm level, can be implemented by technical advisors from our members together with farmers. So it's not just a theory, but it also works in practice. And again here, as it is the opportunity to say thank you, I would like to thank all the members and the farmers that have really contributed to, providing friendly fire to stress test and improve our framework. But enough about the consultation process, or no, a final word on the consultation process, because I think this is really important and a key learning that is not just important for the implementation of the framework, but overall when tackling regenerative agriculture. We wanted to share some key takeaways from these consultations. I think a key takeaway is to stay pragmatic and flexible. So not asking for unnecessary data, making sure that data leads to action and not just reporting. Also allowing for flexibility. Many farmers already report on outcomes because they have to comply with regulations or other aspects. They do it for farm management. So not imposing specific metrics and specific measurement ways, but really working with them on what is best functional creates a lot of buy-in. As I said before, imposing unnecessary data collection is definitely a pain point for farmers. And whenever you go, the reaction we get when we take a spreadsheet to them is, oh no, you squeeze us for more data. So being lean, being flexible is a key aspect. And then I think finally also really particularly making farmers understand that what we do is important, so why it is important, why it matters to them, why it matters to the value chain. It was a key learning, and I'm proud to say that I have all these elements on my whiteboard in my office that I try to consult on a daily basis to make sure that I have my North Star ready. Finally, and that's what we are here for today, is really, we can stay in the ivory tower all day, but we really want to learn it by doing and get it out, testing it, having it adopted, getting friendly fire and continuously improving it. But that's really on the consultation itself. So let's speak about the framework. And to start with, I would like to throw at you our definition, the SAI platform agreed definition of regenerative agriculture. You can read it here. So bluntly spelled out, it's regenerative agriculture is an outcome-based farming approach. So holding up the design principle of outcome-based that protects and improves soil health, biodiversity, climate and water resources while supporting farmer livelihoods. So what we really have focused here on is the environmental impact domains, and we clustered them into 4 categories: soil health, biodiversity, climate and water resources. But also underlining that farmer livelihoods are essential in a just and successful transition. And I can already announce to you, whereas the framework, as we presented today, focuses on the environment, moving forward, we will do more work on socioeconomic indicators and socioeconomic decision points to make sure that we will also deliver on that farmer livelihood aspect with relevant indicators and metrics to make that work. Let me take you to a quick run through of the framework implementation process, and each of these steps that I'm hinting at right now will be discussed in more detail in the later slides. But basically, I would like to recall or remember you of the design principles of the framework. So context specificity, it being outcome-based and it being inclusive. And we try to address that with these 4 steps of the implementation process. So the first step is the context analysis. And the context analysis is there to prioritize outcomes and actions based on the context of a specific farming systems. So farmers, ideally together with agronomy advisors, will answer 10 to 12 questions on aspects that are material in the context of their farming system. And that's either production risks, so risks that affect the productivity or the resilience of production of a farming system, like drought or extreme weather events. And on the other hand, aspects where farming activities may have an influence on the environment, so water abstraction or pesticide leaching, aspects like that. So this is prioritized in the context analysis. The context analysis will then lead to a prioritization of outcomes. There we have a selection of 10 outcomes across these 4 environmental impact domains. And as said, there will be a prioritization based on the context analysis, but there's some level of flexibility to changing that if it's needed. The third step is then practice adoption. So there we recommend practices that can be adopted to improve performance against the selected outcomes. But it again leaves some level of flexibility to allow for contextualization of farming practices that work best in a given context. And thirdly, and finally, there is then the monitoring and assessing progress, leading to claims on regenerative agriculture performance and progress. And there, I think we will discuss that later. We have also some level of flexibility in terms of what indicators we can use to monitor and assess progress. With that, I would like to hand over to my colleague, Giulia De Candido, who has been very instrumental in developing the framework, and she will now take you through the individual steps of the framework as we move on.
Thank you. And hello, everyone. Now I have the pleasure to walk you through the 4 steps that Dominic has just laid out in a bit more detail. And as Dominic mentioned, the first step of our Regenerating Together framework is a context analysis. So as we know, and as Dominic has mentioned at the beginning of his presentation, agriculture is highly dependent on the context, and that can be shaped by agroecological as well as socioeconomic factors such as soil health, climate, infrastructure, and local knowledge. And therefore, it's really important to understand the setting that you're operating in. And our context analysis aims to provide that high-level assessment of an individual farm or a group of farms' environmental and production context. And this supports the group of farms or the individual farms to identify the key risks for them to work towards improving. And it also supports the farms to prioritize the relevant outcomes to monitor. So the analysis, as Dom mentioned, is broken down into 12 material criteria, which span across the 4 impact areas. And that's what you can see on the right-hand side of the screen. And each of these material criteria is accompanied by assessment question, and that aims to guide the farmer or the farm manager, if it is being implemented as a group of farms, in collecting the relevant information to actually justify the score. So for example, if you want to better understand the soil health of a group in an area where the farmers are operating in, then we'll be looking at, for example, whether or not there's a high risk of soil salinity or a greater risk of airborne soil erosion. But that's all outlined in more detail in the narrative. And if the framework is being implemented in a group of farmers, it's really important to make sure that all of the farmers are actively engaged in the step, because it is the foundation to define meaningful outcomes for the whole group to prioritize and work towards. The next step of the framework is then to actually select the outcomes to prioritize. And this is where our global framework becomes more flexible and can be adapted to the local context. So our framework currently defines 8 outcomes across the 4 impact areas that we see as meaningful and quantifiable proxies to track progress against. And these have been refined since the first version of our framework has been released, based on the various consultations that Dominic has mentioned, talking to farmers, members, and other key stakeholders. But essentially building on the findings from the context analysis, in this step, the group of farmers or the individual farms select a minimum of 2 outcomes across 2 impact areas that are most relevant to them to prioritize. And you can see the list of outcomes on the right-hand side and the impact areas that are associated with that outcome. So step 3 then focuses on the practices. Based on the outcomes that are prioritized, this step really emphasizes selecting locally relevant and context-appropriate on-farm actions that can then be included in continuous improvement plans. So as Dominic mentioned, rather than imposing specific practices, the aim of our framework is really to empower farmers and their advisors to select practices that will lead to an improvement against the prioritized outcomes. And as we know, there is increasing evidence that certain practices directly contribute to the improvement of certain regenerative agriculture outcomes. And to strengthen this body of knowledge, we've actually partnered with the National Institute of Agricultural Botany to understand and to map the linkages between practices and the outcomes. And on the right-hand side of this screen, you will see a list of the practices that were included in that study. And as mentioned, this list will continue to grow based on the growing scientific evidence as well as on-farm evidence. But this list and the table that is included in the framework narrative, it can be used to identify and to suggest practices to implement, but we really recommend that it is further validated in terms of the applicability in the local context. Next slide, please. And regenerative agriculture is all about continuous improvement. And as such, the last slide or the last step of our framework emphasizes monitoring and assessing progress. This step is critical to accurately monitor the long-term impact of regenerative agriculture and really to ensure that the intended environmental and socioeconomic benefits are realized over time. This step relies on the continuous improvement plans where baselines are set and where progress is monitored over time. And what we've heard from farmers and our members during the consultation was that there was a need for more flexibility in our framework. And as such, we've moved away from defining a single metric per outcome. And instead, we've included a list of indicators that can be selected based on the context. So on the right-hand side, maybe a bit small, but if you, for example, select increased soil health and fertility as an outcome to prioritize, one indicator could be, for example, looking at the water infiltration rate. Or alternatively, you could monitor your soil organic carbon content. We've also set a defined list of principles for actually selecting a good data strategy. And we also have technical guidance for data collection and for reporting against each of these indicators that are included in our framework. Because one of the key elements of our framework is not to be too prescriptive as to which indicators you select. And we also don't want to be prescriptive in terms of the measurement or the modeling tools that you need to use to track improvement against. And that's why these criteria are really important, because it allows us to ensure that the assessment of performance is still accurate and it is credible. And with these 4 steps in mind, and next slide, please, as well as with the design principles of our framework being context specific as well as inclusive, our framework outlines the following 4 performance levels. The aim of the performance levels is really to acknowledge and to reward farms that have engaged in their journey towards regenerative agriculture. So they should accommodate for the different realities of farming systems, and they should also serve as a basis for incentive mechanisms and market access. There are specific requirements that need to be met for each of these performance levels, and they are described in more detail in the framework narrative, but very high level. For the onboarding level, which you see slightly grayed on the right-hand side of the screen, that's meant more for internal purposes. So really communicating internally about the commitment to transition towards regenerative agriculture. But for all levels, the context analysis needs to be completed and outcomes need to be selected. So for the engaging and for the advancing level, farms need to select a minimum of 2 outcomes to prioritize, as well as 2 practices that span across at least 2 impact areas. The difference between these first 2 levels is that the advancing level also requires the farms to monitor progress against those outcomes. So to set a baseline for the indicator and then to monitor progress over time. And we really emphasize the importance of monitoring progress and really learning from the results and reviewing your continuous improvement plans rather than strictly requiring a demonstration of quantitative improvement against the outcomes. And then for those farms that are more mature, the leading performance level has farms working towards a minimum of 4 outcomes across 4 and implementing 4 different practices across all 4 impact areas. Next slide, please. And now we see the verified claims. So verified claims are a cornerstone for many incentive programs that promote sustainable agriculture. And as such, we are developing an assurance protocol for farms and for a group of farms to make verified performance claims. What we're doing here is we're following a process-based verification protocol, and this really allows us to maintain that flexibility and develop an approach that can be scaled, but is still credible. And this means that for those who want to get third-party verified against our framework, the audit will assess whether the framework has been appropriately implemented. It will also ensure that the data strategy that was used to set the baseline and to monitor performance against those outcomes is actually aligned with the criteria that are defined. It also checks that the continuous improvement plans are appropriately developed, so selecting the correct or practices that should lead to the prioritized outcomes, and that the practices that are in that continuous improvement plan are being implemented across a sample of the farms. So with this verification process, it allows you to make supply chain claims and not impact claims. But we are in the process of finalizing the protocol and the guidance to make these claims, and those resources will be ready for our membership to pilot in 2025. But there's a lot more information on all of these steps in our framework narrative. And as always, we are more than happy to answer any questions that you have either during the webinar in the chat or also afterwards via email or during a call. But with that, I would like to hand over the word to Robin.
Thank you so much, Julia and Dominic, for explaining that in a bit more detail. So for the first part of this webinar, we've heard more of the technical component of the framework that has been released. Our program is perhaps taking a broader look than just the framework itself. We're obviously very conscious of the fact that you need a good framework and alignment behind that to get action, but the action stems from so much more than just having a good framework. And that's where the power of our membership that are really central in driving the activities of SAI platform come in. So today we're actually going to hear from both Danone and Louis Dreyfus on what Region Ag means to them and how they're going about incorporating and adopting the framework. So first of all, we'll hear from Sarah. Sarah, I know you're on the call. So thank you so much for joining us. Two questions that I'd love to hear from you today on. So first, really tell us a little bit more about your outlook as Danone towards regenerative agriculture, perhaps more broadly. And then secondly, how this aligns with our Regenerating Together framework and the plans that you've got, I guess, in terms of what you're doing now and doing going forwards.
Thanks, Robin. Well, like Eve, today I have a double hat because I'm part of the SteerCo as well for the RegAg group for SAI, and I am a director for RegAg at Danone. So I really take my Danone hat now. So maybe as a quick intro of Danone, we are known very much for dairy, but we also source a number of crops for plant-based business, specialized nutrition for babies. It's important because this is why also we are so keen on having this inclusive and universal framework. We also source our ingredients globally. So it's another argument for us to have something relatively standardized, yet flexible and context specific. So now that being said, our approach to RegAg. So we've started quite early on RegAg. And we really have this idea of a holistic approach to agriculture. We saw in the past many topics coming our way, starting from the socio-economic struggles that we could see with some farmers being resilient economically in the field, but also lending to climate. Then we saw deforestation, animal welfare, lots of topics piling up, and the way of addressing this being always kind of in a silo. So very difficult to bring one voice to the field and have coherent program, 360 program, that could look at these different impact areas. So our way to look at RegAg is very much as a holistic approach that can deliver multiple impacts in the field. So impact on multiple fronts, on climate and nature, but also on farmer livelihoods and animal welfare. And as such, we very, very much embrace the SAI definition of regenerative agriculture. What is very important also for us for Red Jag is the recognition of the importance to invest in nature and in farm resilience alongside climate action. In the past few years, we heard a lot about the importance to fight for climate, and this is a key battle, especially for us as a dairy company. That being said, we also have these key challenges for nature overall that we need to tackle. And that Regenag approach allows us to do that in a consistent way and avoiding trade-off and wrong good ideas along the way. So we also have a Regenag as a North Star for the company, one of our North Stars. So we have a sustainability journey that is called Danone Impact Journey at Danone with a number of KPIs. Regenag is part of these KPIs and is also part of our entreprise à mission status. So it's really in the status of the company and part of our mission. And so how do we embrace now the Rejag framework? Or how do we plan to embrace the framework from now on? So first of all, we had an ambition for regenerative agriculture up to 2025. So we'll be expected to renew this ambition for 2030. And we really see the framework as a cornerstone or as an underlying pillar of this ambition. Second, this framework will help us take our journey to another level. How? So first of all, it will really allow us to focus on what matters. So instead of having some kind of blanket approach of looking at all the practices in the field, no matter where, or no matter what ingredient, we'll be much more intentional, being able to look at what really will make a change, will make an impactful change in the field, depending on what we source and where we source it from. Second, it's about how we make sure we move from the reporting of practices to actually making the effort to invest in impact monitoring. Not that we will be able to do that from today to tomorrow, but it's really something that we want to invest in to have results along the way. And then third is how, of course, we can use that to catalyze our action in the field. And I will let Axel from Louis Dreyfus speak about this more also. But I will take a few examples. In terms of catalyze action in the field, we would use it, or we plan to use it in 3 ways. First of all, in our direct sourcing, in particular for milk, we're already starting some sourcing context analysis in our different sourcing regions to make sure we fight the right battles there. And we'll continue and make sure we have a solid program aligned with SAI. That's the example for direct sourcing. We actually have a pilot for SAI today with 2 other players in the dairy side, Friesland and Arla. It's called Future Fit Dairy, which is about piloting the SAI framework in northwestern dairy systems. So how we can adapt this framework? How do we make sure we have the right thresholds, etc., and give a feedback loop to SAI? The second target we have is the multi-stakeholder program. So for some of the ingredients, in particular for plant-based, we are in a rotation. We don't source 100% of the production of the farm. So of course, we need to deal with other players. This framework is already being used today in our new project as the basics of our program design. And I have the example of the Haute Nava 360 program today, which is planning to work with 200 farms in north of Spain on oats, but the rest of the rotation as well with a number of other players. And the SAI framework is key in the monitoring in the design of the program and the monitoring of progress along the way. It will also be part of the underlying piece for anything linked to incentive model for the farmers and suppliers we work with. And then the third part that would be in the future, later in the future, that would be for how we can leverage the SDP and FSA as industry solution from SAI to not necessarily have directly in the field program where we directly involve them, but we can leverage and valorize the work of our partnering suppliers in Regenag as well through these 2 industry solutions. I hope it's clear, Robin. Please, guys, let me know if you have any questions.
That was brilliant. And just to, I guess, add on to what Sarah said there, questions can come through in the chat and we'll have a little bit of time at the end. So coming on to the next speaker, and I'll just bring up my screen again so you can have the intro, is Axel. And amazingly, they've gone above and beyond and even actually coordinated on some of what they're sharing today. So I think, Axel, what you're going to share now is actually building on what Sarah has shared. So I will hand over to you to take it away.
Thank you, Robin. So for us who do not know LDC well, we are a leading trader. So we are part of the ABCD, so the big first farmer-facing buyer of row crops. and we ship from everywhere in the world to pretty much everywhere in the world. So for us, the journey on regenerative agriculture is a bit more recent than some of our downstream customers like Danone. It started a few years ago, and now we have a global commitment of 3 million acres to be converted to regenerative agriculture by 2030. The reason why we're doing it, is a bit different than why a consumer-facing company would do it. We don't have customers and consumers facing us and asking for this type of requirements. However, what we do have is an incredibly strong dependency on the viability and the long-term ability to produce from farming systems, because basically if we don't have farmers that are productive over time, that are viable over time, and that can deliver accordingly also to evolving regulation into the geographies where they're from, then we don't have access to crops to source, and basically we don't have a business anymore. So all of that elements of building resilience to climate change, but also to increasingly, stronger and more frequent market shocks that farmers have to handle, including from dependency to the input sector, to the seed sector, is a very strong element of that. And we also have more and more requests, pressure from evolving regulatory framework, but also from you guys as our customers on delivering onto your Scope 3 targets. So it usually mainly comes from a focus on decarbonization initially, but more and more also many players being actively involved in setting science-based target for nature, having nature policy, looking beyond carbon at impacts of farming on biodiversity and water, but also dependencies from farming, to biodiversity and water. So RegionAg program for us, it really is a way to have a multi-stakeholder approach at landscape level around how can we ensure the profitability, the viability of farming systems that we depend on over time, while having a holistic delivery on ecosystem services. So our theory of change is really based on the fact that we think we can be a good player to reach scale because of the footprint we have at farm level, and that we can do that really in partnership with other players downstream in the supply chain with us, but also upstream from the farmer level, and peers and to some extent, other players that also purchase at the same crop rotation, so we can catalyze farmer value proposition, farmer incentives, technical assistance at farm level into a landscape, so the adoption, can grow and we can really reach that snowball effect. We are very conscious that, there are players from the CPG world that have been doing smaller scale program quite, with a lot of success over time, and our role is not to compete with that, but really to take the knowledge that has been developed during all of that phase of experimentation that other companies have been doing, and try to see how can we implement that through multi-stakeholder landscape level program in order to achieve that scalability of those programs. One element of scalability for us is that because we have to work across crop rotation and across multiple elements of the value chain, from LDC to a first transformer, and a second one, and a third one, and then Danone, and then a retailer at the end of the chain, then obviously we cannot have all of our co-founders of the program, all of the other stakeholders participating at the program, coming up with a different expectation on what the program needs to deliver. We need to have a solid foundation on how do we define what are the key priorities in terms of impact that makes sense in a landscape. And for us, another element that is super important is that this needs to be farmer-centric and farmer-relevant, because if we are to propose, impact areas or even practices that are completely out of the blue for what farmers are able to deliver or what they are worried about and what actually impacts them, then we are losing our own credibility and our relationship upstream with those farmers, which again is the one asset that we have as being that part of the supply chain. So that connectivity between downstream companies' expectation, multi-stakeholder expectation, and farmer centricity, farmer relevance, local farming system relevance is absolutely crucial for us to be able to have programs that have the ability to scale. And in that sense, you know, yeah, the regionalizing together framework for us is the one thing that can put everybody on the same, you know, that to agree basically on the same principles. The context assessments as a methodology, we can conduct it together, or we can be commissioned to conduct it, or we can defer it to a third party. But all of the methodological elements on what needs to be assessed so that we have a common understanding of what are the key issues in a certain landscape and a certain farming system, you know, then there's no discussion anymore on what are the metrics that we need to prioritize and why, and how relevant are they at farming system level. And then all of the reporting infrastructure that comes next, choosing the metrics, and then letting the freedom of farmers to choose from series of practices that have been proven to deliver on those impact areas that we have prioritized in the initial stage of the implementation of the framework, also give us the credibility to know, okay, you know, like what we are going to propose as technical support, as potential incentives to farmer level, linked to a list of practices actually makes sense, and is actually going to deliver on the impact areas that we have prioritized in the earlier stage. So it's really a way to catalyze a consensus, but also to catalyze eventually what is the most critical, which is a multiplicity of funding opportunities in order to fund the transition at farm level, because we have that common understanding and that common methodological framework. So that's how we are planning to implement it. Of course, like all of you, we are in the early stage of that because it's just been released, right? So we are working with the previous version before, but now it's very much intentional, and we in all humility do not have the feedback to say what has worked and what has not worked, but I hope we can have that collective conversation in maybe a year from now. And another element that we would like to try is to pilot that program in all of the different field programs that we have across geographies and across commodities, so we can also create, you know, knowledge and collective intelligence around what tricks and adaptation do we need to make in the framework in the future to make it even more fit to the diversity of farming system we all operate with.
Amazing. So I think if what between the two of you you've just outlined there, I think that's such a beautiful image of what we are all aiming towards and to achieve. I have one question to you both before I'll then go on to the looking ahead. So as a call to action, what would you say to those that are joining this call, or that will hopefully see the recording afterwards? What is this call to action to all the stakeholders out there? And maybe Axel, do you want to go first, and then Sarah?
So my first one would be try it out in your existing programs. You know, the more feedback we have on actual use case and using it at farm level and at field level is going to inform the next iterations of the framework to make it even more suitable for our common purpose. So that would be my first call to action. You know, it's there. Use it. It's going to be imperfect. There's going to be stuff that you're going to be frustrated about, us as well. But that is, again, part of the collective intelligence and, you know, like development of something that can work for everybody. So that's the first one. And maybe a second call to action is, you know, if you have intentions to deploy regional program, look around, because we need collaboration. We need to go beyond a single company going for their in-house single programs. You know, we need to tag along. There are many ways in which we can do it. We can do it through, you know, multiple funding and like passing on different claims for players that are in the same supply chain, and that's a very effective way to do that. We can also doing it in looking at, okay, how can we map overlaps that we have in terms of sourcing geographies from the different crops, where we can have a value of packages to farmers that go beyond one single crop, and that we can tag along, you know, like I do the corn, you do the barley, somebody else does the soy, and all together then we have a package incentive. So reach out, look around you, and try not to go alone, because it's the pathway to be stuck in terms of scalability.
Thanks so much. And maybe a quick plug there for SAI platform in being able to help some of the matchmaking required in that case as well. So Sarah, over to you. Call to action.
Yeah, well, very similar to Axel. The first point would be let's bring it to the field. I think that collectively, as part of SAI, we have lots of reach upstream, downstream, as B2B, B2C, the farmers as well. So let's make sure that we start and speak about it and experience it in the field. I think the impact we will catalyze, it could be really fast, actually, now that we have this very concrete piece of work. And then maybe the second call for action would be, let's make sure we consider the framework as a mean to an end, the end being the impact. We are there to make this move in the field to support farmers doing it. So how can we make sure that this framework is not simply ticking the box or reporting duty, but really how we activate it, we leverage it at the service of impact in the field together.
Thank you very much. And Eve, I see your camera has come back on, and I want to give you the floor in case there's anything else you want to add to what has been said.
No, I think Axel and Sarah spoke very well. I think we need to use it. We need to talk about it, talk to growers, talk to our customers as well, and let's make it work. I'd say this is a tool for us to use, so let's use it. Thanks.
Amazing. Right. So with that said, I guess we come on to some of the how and what to expect next. Just a quick note to say, great to see questions coming through. I think some of our team are beginning to answer those, and we'll have a little bit of time. But I want to round out to show, what is coming next, because obviously everything that has been spoken about is part of a much bigger system. And we do need more than just the framework. And even I've noticed some of the questions around guidance and additional things coming. So where is that coming? How does it fit in? That's what I will spend just a few moments explaining for you. So we are now in November, 2024 has flown by. In January, we'll be releasing a few more documents go along with the framework itself that has been released 2 weeks ago now. So here are some of the components. First up will be the framework implementation guidance. So behind the framework, there is a lot more work that has gone on to help specifically in guiding each of the steps, how to adopt, etc. Then some quantification guidance to go with that. So that's really supporting in the selection of outcomes, indicators, practices, how to go about then monitoring those as well. And then thirdly is the assurance protocol. Now, Julia mentioned a little bit around the assurance piece that's coming. So protocol will be, I guess, everything, the more formal component behind that in terms of then the claims you are able to make. So they'll all come out as one package early next year. And then finally is the assessment tool. So while the framework itself can be used without a tool as kind of more guidance, more of a conceptual framework, I suppose, there will be a tool to go with this, much in the way that we have for our FSA, our Farm Sustainability Assessment, and our SDP. So they are all of the things coming in the next couple of months that the team, our steerco and everyone else is very busy pulling together. So in terms of what else next, and we very deliberately had this as an open webinar to all to attend, because while we are very much driven by our members and their farmers, this is a much broader system of stakeholders. And so today we wanted to give you a bit more insight into the framework, how it was developed, what's in it. And really the call is, let's engage. If you feel inclined to, if you agree with what we have shared, please endorse and share. And we want you to keep the momentum going. So as actually Sarah, Axel and Eve all alluded to, while this framework has only just come out 2 weeks ago, Region Ag has been, I guess, as a sector, we've been on this journey for some time. These projects are either starting or building or scaling. Keep that going, keep commencing, keep expanding. Test this on your existing projects. Use it as a spark for future collaborations around regenerative agriculture. But the call really is to keep that momentum going. And if and where you may have existing case studies, we'd really love you to reach out to us, because a big part of our role is also about showing what's already happening, the learnings, and sharing and scaling those as quickly as possible. For our members in 2025, we'll also have some more specific components on the transition support piece and engagement there. But I think the key message for those that aren't members that are joining this call is engage through our members. They're the ones that get access to all of this first, and keep working and collaborating there. So as a last question to you, those of you in this call still, we also just want to quickly ask a question of where do you plan to test and adopt the framework? So those of you that have regular webinars and calls with me knows I'm not averse to a Slido poll when we've got lots of people on the call just to get some form of engagement. So what we'll do, because we've got just a couple of minutes left of this session, is I'll keep the poll up, but also as people are putting their answers in, I might hand over to Dom, if he doesn't mind, just to respond if there are any questions that you want to respond live to as people are typing their answers in. So yeah, Dom, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Robin. And I tried to answer to some or provide answers to some of the questions in the chat already, but please forgive me, my typing is notoriously slow. So I think there were some questions around, how holistic we can be with regenerative agriculture, or with our approach to regenerative agriculture, basically focusing on only 2 outcomes for some of the performance levels. I think there we really had to make a judgment call on what is possible in certain farming systems that might not have, the resources and the regulatory pressure that we, for instance, have in Europe or the US. So again, making it inclusive. But we do recommend different performance levels for different contexts. So more ambitious farming systems should go for, or more developed farming systems should go for higher performance levels. I think another question was then on, how does, regenerative agriculture, our approach to regenerative agriculture relate to organic farming? I think that's something we also debated a lot and discussed a lot. I think as mentioned, a key design principle for the framework was to be outcome-based, so specific about what success looks like, but not necessarily on how you get there. And I think that's a key differentiator to organic farming, where it's quite prescriptive in what to do and what not. So organic agriculture can be a pathway to regenerative farming systems, but we would really want to, in our approach, we would recommend focusing on the outcomes and taking the right practices and approaches then to improve or to progress towards these outcomes. Let me go to the chat. Again, I think then there was one question about baselines. So whether, how to establish baselines. I would refer to our outcome quantification guidelines that we will publish soon on that. But there's several ways, and historic baselines we also can count against progress in our framework. So we definitely don't want to punish farmers that are early adopters and already, moving ahead quite quickly. Maybe before I get lost in too many questions, and we will promise to send written answers to the ones I haven't answered, and bearing in mind that we are on top of the hour, maybe quickly back to you, Robin, for concluding observations.
Thanks, Dom. Yeah, so there's many more questions coming through, so we'll make a note of those. In the meantime, thank you so much to those of you that are actually typing in the poll. It's really great to see. It was more just to get a flavour, and so that those of you still on the call can see where else is being adopted. I mean, we had that the slide earlier with the global map showing where we've tested already, but really the emphasis now is on testing and scaling to make sure that this is a framework that can be adopted globally in all contexts, and we need your help for that. I like to think of it as kind of a big nexus of action research that we are doing as an industry, as farmers, as academia, etc. So very much all to play for in terms of what's coming and your involvement in that going forward. So with that, I really would like to just say thank you to those of you who have joined. We've had a great turnout of those joining today. Lots more to come. And thank you once again for both your time, but also engagement and commitment on this journey towards regenerative agriculture. So thank you, everyone. And we will hopefully be in contact and speak to many of you